Ngā mana nui o te ao, ngā tapu nui o te pō, tēnā rā koutou katoa I hui mai I tēnei rā. He uri tēnei o ngā puhi nui tonu e tuake nei, nō reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ever since I was asked to do this TEDx talk, I've been trying to externalize a really complicated situation inside my head. I thought to myself, I know what, I'll go online and I'll watch some TED Talks, because I'd only watched one before. Holy heck. A whole lot of scientists and academics and therapists talking about concept and research and life. One woman was even holding a real-life human brain in her hands as a prop, and I decided that I should stop watching TED Talks. October 2013, I found myself at Heathrow Airport in London with a young person, 14-year-old by the name of Keisha King. When we got to the customs desk, the customs officer said to me, "And how is it that you have come to be standing here with a 14-year-old that isn't related to you?" I suddenly thought to myself, do I look like a human trafficker? And I remembered that at Auckland Airport, Andy had given me this document, this envelope, and I put it in my bag, and I suddenly thought sometime between the flight from Aotearoa to London, I probably should have pulled it out and see what it said inside. Anyway, I thought, okay, this must have the answers. I pulled it out of my bag and gave it to him. He pulled out the documents and he started reading them. And he looked up at us over the papers and over his glasses. And he said, "And what is your reason for visiting?" And a very excited 14-year-old next to me said, "We're here to have dinner with the prince." And he looked at us blankly. And I laughed and he didn't. And he kept on reading his papers, and I thought to myself, this guy must totally think we're crazy. And I said, "Actually, she is right. We're here for a week because Prince Edward invited us to come and have dinner with him." And he looked at me again, looked down, stamped our passports, gave them to us, and then through we went. And on the other end, we were met by this immaculate-looking British woman with silky blonde hair and perfect pink lip gloss. And she said, "Kia ora. Welcome to London." And there we were, standing in London. And I was well aware that by being invited to such an event, in some way I was being acknowledged for the work that I'd done with young Maori people for the past 10 years. And by accepting the invitation to go and have dinner with British royalty, I was also well aware that with me I was taking the pain and the hurt of my ancestors and my people that had been suffered at the hands of the British representatives of the monarchy, that had led to the ultimate devastation of my people and immense loss of land. It's hard to be a royalist when you have this shared history. But there I was 100 years later, sitting there with Prince Edward, with a shared history of bloodshed, of war, of mixed whakapapa, hopes and aspirations. For my high school years, I was in a total immersion Maori unit at Reo Rumaki at Western Springs College, and it was amazing. 5 years of high school education, all within Maori language. And then after that, I left and I went to the far north. And I did a year-long course with a private Maori training organisation called Ngāti Wai Wānanga Raurau Foundation. And it was an outdoor-focused course. And there were 10 of us young Maori people that lived together in this small little 3-bedroom house for 45 weeks in a row in a town called Punaruku. And if you don't know where that is, when you get there, the locals will quickly remind you that it's actually the center of the universe. And it was amazing. On this course, we learnt about kayaking and abseiling and tramping and scuba diving. And then on the other side, we learnt about weaving and gardening and carving, and they taught us how to karanga, mow our old people's lawns, and how to host people at our marae. It was a journey that I needed to take in order to learn about how to engage in the natural environment from a Maori perspective. We did everything in accordance with the maramataka, or it's like the Maori calendar. So it teaches us about the different phases of the moon, and then depending on which phase the moon is in would determine the activities that we did. And along with that, as young Maori women, we learn about the phase of our own personal moon, or our menstruation cycle. And we learnt about what we did and didn't do during that time. And we learn about the spiritual and the practical reasons behind that. I remember one time we were on the Hokianga Harbour. There was about 20 of us, and we were doing a 10-day waka journey. And whenever we would paddle along and we'd see the land where we were going to camp the night, if any of the girls on the boat had their period, then the boys would carry them from the boat to the land because we don't go into the ocean when we have our period. And we used to watch the boys piggyback them and make sure that not even the girls' toes went into the water until they got to land. And I remember our boys and thinking, that's so cool, like that's so awesome. And now I think, gee, that's not the image that you necessarily see or hear about young Maori men. But that was our way of life, and it was normal. And it never occurred to me at the time that living and learning like that would one day not be normal. At the end of that 6 years of total immersion Māori education, at the age of 19, I moved back to Auckland. And I was kind of an outdoor instructor. I'd learned all this stuff, and I knew that I wanted to work in the outdoor industry. But I also knew that I needed more qualifications, and I'd heard about this amazing diploma at AUT, Auckland University of Technology. And it was known up and down the country that if you wanted to be an outdoor instructor, it's really good to do this diploma. And so I was like, okay, cool, that's what I want to do. So I enrolled, and my first day, I realized that learning within a Māori environment was no longer normal. I went from 6 years of total immersion Māori education to being the only Māori person in my class. And it was difficult. I remember things like, if there's kayaking assessment on those days, and I can't go into the water, then I might not pass the kayaking exam. I remember the feeling of being in an institution that didn't understand my way of seeing the world, and particularly my way of interacting with the natural environment and all of the things associated with that. I remember feeling like I had become the difficult one, the Māori in the group that always has to make things difficult. I remember ignorant comments like, are you sure you're Māori? You're pretty fair. I remember being a part of this institution that didn't have any particular desire to understand how I interacted with the outdoors, but they were teaching people how to become outdoor leaders on this whenua. I wanted to leave after every 6 months, but I didn't. I stayed because I knew that I needed to have this qualification, and then when I came out with it, I was ready to go into the workforce, and I was ready to work as an outdoor instructor. I quickly realized that there was nowhere really for me to go and work unless I wanted to put a whole part of myself aside in order to go to work and earn money. I wasn't willing to compromise who I was as a Māori woman in order to go to work and earn money. So I decided that I couldn't be an outdoor instructor. Instead, I started a job with a Māori theatre company. I had no background in drama or theatre, but I was Māori, so it would work. So I went down to Wellington and I worked for this amazing theatre company, and we worked with young people, young Māori people. That's who I wanted to work with. And we created these theatre productions of their journey through darkness into light and their hopes for the future, and we toured them around. And then the end of the year came, and I realized what I really wanted to do was work in the outdoors and work with young Māori people. So I moved back to Auckland, and I had this idea. I have to start my own business in order to work in a way that I want to work. So with this idea and $200 in my bank account, I knew it was going to happen. And luckily I had this friend who had a friend who was known as the fairy godmother. And now I know that the proper name for a fairy godmother is a philanthropist. And the fairy godmother heard about my idea, and she was very kind and very generous, and she offered to give me some money to help me start my business. But I remember her saying to me, you want to start a business, right? And I was like, yep. And she goes, and the point of business is to make money, isn't it? And I was like, yep. And she goes, well, I don't know if you're going to make that much money working with young people. Maybe you should start a tourism company. And I was like, oh, yeah, sweet. That sounds like a great idea. I'll just start a tourism company. So at the age of 24, I started my company, Potiki Adventures, and 24 is a really good age to start a company because you're totally still naive to the real risks of going into business. The business quickly took off. I took all of my kind of education that I'd done, the outdoors and the Māori component, and combined it into a product that I could offer overseas visitors that introduced them to our culture, but in a way that's relevant to our lives today. And how we exist on this land. 3 years later, we won a National New Zealand Tourism Award, Best Māori Woman in Business Award, a few Her Business Magazine awards, And about a year into the company, it became known that I had the ability to work with young people. And so different organizations were approaching my company to contract and work with young Maori people throughout the North Island. And at the moment, we work with hundreds of young people. If you ever kind of see or hear a big noise down at Oneroa Beach when you're up in the village and you look down and there's about 40 kids in the water, that'll be one of my groups. What I realized from when I was what I realize now about when I was younger was that the way that I'd been educated, I'd had the opportunity to learn in this Maori environment, and so many of our young people do, but then what happens when you come out at the other end and you need to create a living, you need to make money to support yourself and your family. And I realize now when I look back that if you go on your path and you're really clear about where you want to go and what you want to do, and you're authentic about that, then it's kind of like you start to become, like you have like a magnetic kind of a field around you, and so then you start to kind of draw in the things that you need to help that journey, and they start to kind of clip onto you, and then everything else falls away so that you can start moving forward. Dr. Ranginui Walker has a book called Ka Whawhai Tonu Mātou, or Struggle Without End. And in it he talks about Maui, our great ancestor Maui Potiki. Potiki means the youngest child in the family, and Maui was the youngest child in his family, the youngest brother. And one of the things that Maui always wanted to do was go fishing with his brothers, but his brothers would never really let him. They were like, "Nah, Maui, stay behind." And he hated this. So one day what he did was he thought up a plan to go fishing with his brothers, and he had his grandmother's magical jawbone, and he stayed up late all night, and he did his karakia, or his incantations, and he made this amazing long fishing line out of muka and flax, and he attached it to the jawbone. And he went down to his brother's canoe, and he lifted up the floorboards, and he lay underneath it and put them back down. And they came down before the sun had risen, and they pulled the waka out onto the water, and they paddled it out. As the sun came up and the sunbeams came through the floorboards and hit Maui's skin, he knew that they were far enough out that he was going to go fishing. So he laughed, he thought it was a great joke. He started giggling, and the brothers went, "What?" And they lifted up the floorboards. They're like, "Maui, you tricked us." And he's like, "Yep, that's right, I'm going to go fishing." And they're like, "Well, yeah, you're here, Maui, but we're not going to take you all the way back in, but you're also not going to be able to go fishing because you don't have a fish hook." And he pulled out his fish hook. He's like, "Yes, I am, I've got this." And they said, "Well, that's all good, but how are you going to go fishing if you don't have any bait?" So he bit his nose until it bled, and then he put the blood on the fish hook, he dried it in the sun, and he threw it over the side of the waka. And pretty much instantly, this huge fish took hold. And the brothers tried to keep the balance of the waka as he hauled it in. And as it came in, they realized it was the biggest fish that any of them had ever seen in their whole life. And Maui said to his brothers, "Look after this fish for me. I'm going to return to Hawaii, to our homeland, and say the karakia, or give thanks for this beautiful fish that we've received." And when he was gone, his brothers got jealous, and they grabbed their toki and their adze blades, and they hacked at this fish. And it writhed in agony until it eventually died with all of these chop marks out of it. And that fish is Te Ika o Maui, the North Island of New Zealand. The story of how this land came to be. And all of the chop marks are the mountains, the mountainous terrain of the North Island. And in Dr. Ranginui Walker's book, he talks about the characteristics associated with Maui. He was resourceful, determined to succeed, fearless, he was bold, and he was cheeky. And all of those characteristics were idolized by Maori society. And it showed that even if you come from humble beginnings, and even if you're the youngest in your family or you're the smallest company in an industry, it means that you have the potential to achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve. And all of our whenua and all of our land and everything that we see in this country has a narrative that's similar to that makes us make sense of everything that we see around us and how we exist as humans. The umbilical cord that connects us as humans to the land. The name for afterbirth in Maori is whenua. The name for the land is whenua. It shows a direct connection between us and the land. And my hope is that when other young Maori people come through education, whether they want to be accountants or lawyers or outdoor instructors or whatever they want to be, that they have Maori businesses or organizations or non-Maori businesses and organizations that celebrate living and working by Maori customs and values. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā koutou katoa.